It started with the sound of splitting plastic, a sharp, violent crack that tore through the 6 a.m. silence of Silver Creek, echoing off the canyon walls like a gunshot, jolting me from a dream where my late wife, Elena, was still alive and watering her tomatoes. I stumbled out the back door, clutching my bathrobe against the morning chill, only to find a nightmare unfolding in my driveway. A woman named Cynthia Sterling swinging a crowbar with the manic energy of a person possessed, smashing through the side of my third custom rainwater collection barrel. Industrial orange paint, the kind road crews used to mark hazard zones, was spraying everywhere, mixing with hundreds of gallons of stored rainwater to form a toxic, neon-colored river that gushed around my bare feet, cold and slimy, reeking of chemical propellant and pure, unadulterated vandalism. Cynthia, the newly elected president of the Oakhaven Heights Homeowners Association, paused her demolition just long enough to look up at me, a splatter of orange paint streaking across her $500 designer blazer. And she didn't look sorry. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked triumphant, flashing a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. "What would you do?" I yelled toward my security camera later, my voice shaking not with fear, but with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "If a stranger attacked your property with a weapon at dawn just to prove a point?" My name is Elias Vance, and 3 years ago, I thought I had bought a slice of heaven, a place where the mountain air tasted like pine and freedom, a sanctuary where Elena could live out her final days fighting cancer in peace, surrounded by the garden she had always dreamed of. When she passed, this 2.5-acre property wasn't just land, it was a shrine, and every vegetable I grew for the local food bank, over 200 pounds a month, was a promise kept to her memory, a way to keep her spirit alive in the soil she loved. Oakhaven Heights had marketed itself as a rural preservation community, a place that respected the land. But that was before Cynthia Sterling rolled into town in a white Mercedes SUV that looked less like a car and more like a sterilization chamber on wheels. She was a failed real estate mogul from the coast who believed that property value was a religion and she was its high priestess, armed with an iPad and a measuring tape, obsessing over aesthetic consistency, which apparently meant my legal, environmentally friendly water barrels were a personal insult to her existence. The war didn't start with the crowbar, though. It started on a Tuesday in March with the crunch of gravel under her heels, a sound I would come to associate with impending headaches, as she marched up my driveway flanked by the newly formed Environmental Compliance Committee, 3 terrified neighbors clutching clipboards like shields. "Mr. Vance," she had announced, her perfume so overpowering it strangled the scent of my damp earth, "we need to address the eyesore." And just like that, she handed me a 50-page document, a new water resource management addendum, that had been passed in a secret midnight meeting I was never invited to, declaring that rainwater collection was now a violation punishable by a $500 impact fee and $50 monthly monitoring charges. My hands, calloused from 30 years of designing municipal irrigation systems across the state, shook as I held the paperwork, not because I was intimidated, but because the math was terrifying. Living on a fixed retirement income of $2,400 a month after Elena's medical bills had wiped us out meant that Cynthia's extortion fees weren't just an annoyance, they were a foreclosure sentence. She thought she had me cornered, thought I was just another old man with dirt under his fingernails who would roll over and die to save his house. But she made a critical miscalculation because she didn't know that before I retired, I didn't just know water law, I had helped build the infrastructure of this entire county. As her Mercedes purred away that day, leaving me standing in the dust, I walked to my shed and pulled out a dusty, yellowing file marked Property Survey 1943, containing a deed that predated every McMansion in this subdivision, a document that whispered of power she couldn't comprehend. "She has no idea what real pressure looks like," I whispered to the empty air, clutching Elena's wedding ring on the chain around my neck. But Cynthia moved faster than I expected, returning 2 days later with her brother-in-law, Julian Sterling, the HOA's attorney, a man who wore suits that cost more than my truck and carried himself with the oily confidence of a guy who cheats at golf. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension as he slapped a cease and desist order into my chest. "State water rights do not supersede HOA covenants. You have 48 hours to drain these containers, or we begin foreclosure proceedings." And to make matters worse, they brought out laser measuring tools, documenting every barrel, every tomato plant, logging violations like they were crime scene investigators. They were fining me $200 a day, compounding interest, building a debt so fast it made my head spin, and as they worked, I saw my mailman, Arthur, hovering by the hedge, looking pale and nervous. "Elias," Arthur whispered after the legal circus had left. "It's not just you. She's doing this to Martha Chun for her bird feeders, and Big Mike Russo for his work truck. She's targeting people, trying to force them out." That was the moment the tumblers clicked into place. The moment I realized this wasn't about water or mosquitoes or property values. This was a coordinated hit, a systematic purging of anyone who didn't fit Cynthia's perfect image, and I knew I had to act. I spent the next afternoon in the dusty basement of the county law library, surrounded by books that smelled like old vanilla and justice, and with the help of the librarian, I confirmed what my engineer's brain already knew: Colorado's prior appropriation doctrine. First in time, first in right. My water rights didn't just exist. They were senior to the HOA, senior to the subdivision, senior to everything, because they were tied to the land since 1943, enshrined in the state constitution, creating a legal shield that no 2-bit HOA bylaw could penetrate. I filed a motion with the water court that very Friday, but I knew Cynthia wouldn't care about the law until it bit her, so I installed high-definition security cameras, and sure enough, the footage from Saturday night showed Cynthia and Julian creeping around my property at 2 a.m. like cartoon villains, flashlights cutting through the dark. "The old fool doesn't have the money to fight us," Cynthia hissed on the recording, her voice clear as day. "Once the fines hit 15 grand, we force the sale and the lot is ours." "Just document everything," Julian replied. "We need a paper trail to justify the theft." They were manufacturing evidence to steal my home, the last piece of Elena I had left, and as I watched them on my monitor, sipping cold coffee in the dark, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. They wanted a war over water? Fine. I would give them a lesson in hydraulics they would never forget. The escalation was swift and brutal, a masterclass in suburban psychological warfare that would have made a dictator blush. By Monday, Cynthia had rammed through an immediate violation resolution protocol, a fancy term for steal Elias's house faster, which spiked the interest on my unpaid fines to 18% monthly, compounded daily, a financial noose tightening around my neck with every sunrise. But the money was just the opening salvo. Cynthia's true talent lay in character assassination, launching a whisper campaign that painted me as the neighborhood lunatic, a senile hoarder breeding disease in his backyard, telling neighbors that my vegetable garden was attracting vermin, and that my water barrels were a biological hazard threatening their children with West Nile virus. She even called the county health department, and when the inspector arrived, half the neighborhood was watching from behind their curtains like vultures waiting for a carcass. But to Cynthia's visible frustration, my filtration system was impeccable, the water cleaner than what came out of her taps. That didn't stop the flyers, though. Anonymous notes appearing on doorsteps warning of the water hoarder and chemical contamination, printed on heavy stock paper that screamed expensive, professional sabotage. I wasn't fighting alone anymore, though. I had called Martha Chun, the retired bird feeder lady, who turned out to be a retired federal prosecutor with a mind like a steel trap and a grudge the size of Texas. "Elias," she said, sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by stacks of HOA bylaws, her eyes gleaming. "I've been digging into Cynthia's finances. She's drowning, her Mercedes is leased, her house is underwater, and her business is dead. She needs money, fast." We were joined by Big Mike Russo, whose construction company gave him insight into land deals, and Sarah Jenkins, who worked in county planning, and together, under the dim light of Mike's garage, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together. "It's a commercial development deal," Sarah revealed, spreading a map across the workbench. "A massive expansion pending approval, but it requires 85% resident buy-in or forced sales. Cynthia isn't harassing us for fun. She's clearing the board to secure a multi-million-dollar commission." The sheer scale of the greed was breathtaking. She was willing to destroy lives, evict retirees, and bulldoze memories just to save her own skin. Then came the night that changed everything. The night my security cameras caught Cynthia crossing a line from harassment to straight-up felony. It was 3 a.m. on a Thursday when she crept onto my property carrying a gallon of household bleach, moving methodically from barrel to barrel, pouring the toxic chemical into my filtration systems, poisoning the water I use to grow food for the hungry. "We need him gone before the investors see the resistance," she whispered to herself, unaware that my high-gain microphone was capturing every syllable. "Just make the water smell bad." My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her destroy weeks of collection, the smell of bleach ghosting through my memory. But as the anger boiled, I realized she had just handed me the smoking gun, the proof that this was criminal. But I couldn't just have her arrested. Not yet. She had planned a garden party for that Saturday, a massive gala to woo the Denver investors, to show off the lakefront potential of the community, and she was setting up a massive white tent, catering trucks, and a string quartet right in the middle of the lower valley, right in the floodplain. "Martha," I said over the phone the next morning, my voice steady. "Tell me about the easement on my deed again." "It grants you full riparian rights to the dam upstream," she replied. "And mandatory maintenance authority? Why?" "Because," I said, looking out at the mountains, "the dam is overdue for a pressure release, and structural integrity is a safety issue. We wouldn't want a catastrophic failure, would we?" The plan formed with the precision of a Swiss watch. According to the 1943 deed, I owned the control rights to the earthen dam that created the neighborhood's decorative lake, a dam that Cynthia treated as her personal backdrop, but which I was legally obligated to maintain. Big Mike brought in the pumps and generators. Sarah handled the notifications to the county emergency services, framing it as a critical safety release due to snow melt. And Martha drafted the liability waivers that were so watertight, even God couldn't sue us. We targeted the notification strategically, informing families with kids and the elderly to evacuate as a precaution. But Cynthia? She was so busy planning her party, so busy bribing judges for fake restraining orders, that she ignored the posted signs on the community board. On Friday, Julian tried to serve me with a cease and desist, sweating through his suit, threatening me with terrorism charges, but Martha laughed in his face, citing the Colorado Constitution. "You can't enjoin a safety procedure," she told him, "unless you want to be liable for the dam collapsing and killing everyone." Cynthia even tried to bribe me, showing up at my door with mascara running down her face, offering $25,000 cash to just delay the maintenance for 24 hours. But I looked at her, saw the woman who had poisoned my water and mocked my dead wife, and I simply closed the door. By Saturday morning, the stage was set. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The investors were arriving in black SUVs. The white silk tents were fluttering in the breeze, set up exactly at the lowest point of the valley, directly in the path of the spillway. I stood at the top of the dam, my hand resting on the rusted iron wheel of the release gate, feeling the vibration of 2.8 million gallons of water pressing against the concrete, begging to be let loose. It wasn't revenge, I told myself, feeling the weight of Elena's ring. It was education. The clock ticked toward 3 p.m., the tension in the air so thick it felt like static electricity against my skin, while down below in the valley, the scene was one of obscene opulence. Cynthia's garden party was in full swing, a sea of white linen, crystal stemware, and investors in Italian loafers sipping champagne, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the middle of a historic flood channel. Jessica Vale, the environmental reporter we had tipped off, was positioned on the ridge with her camera crew, her lens trained on the dam and the party simultaneously, ready to broadcast the lesson of a lifetime. At 2:59 p.m., I radioed Big Mike, who was stationed downstream with safety spotters. "Status: clear." Mike's voice crackled back, grim but ready. "Perimeter is secure. No civilians in the danger zone. Let her rip, Elias." I took a breath, the mountain air filling my lungs, and gripped the cold steel of the release wheel. This was legally mandated maintenance. This was structural safety. This was for Elena. I turned the wheel. The groan of metal against metal echoed through the canyon like the awakening of a sleeping giant, followed immediately by a deep, guttural roar as the sluice gates opened. 50,000 gallons of water per hour began to thunder down the spillway, a frothing white ribbon of constitutional authority carving its way toward the valley floor. Down at the party, the string quartet was playing Mozart. At 3:15 p.m., The first tendrils of water reached the manicured lawn, creeping around the edges of the white pavilion like liquid fingers. Cynthia was in the middle of a speech about exclusive waterfront living, laughing nervously as she gestured to the dampening grass. "Just a minor irrigation adjustment," she shrilled, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Nothing to worry about, gentlemen. But water, as I have always known, is honest. It doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about your net worth." By 3:30 p.m., the water was 4 inches deep and rising fast. The realization hit the crowd like a physical blow. The investors stopped sipping their champagne and started looking at their soaking wet designer shoes. The white silk drapes began to wick up the muddy water, turning brown and heavy. Then, the flow arrived in earnest. It wasn't a tsunami, but a steady, relentless surge that transformed the party venue into a swamp. Catering tables began to float, drifting away like ghostly barges carrying soggy hors d'oeuvres. The sound system popped, sparked, and died with a pathetic whine, plunging Cynthia's screams into unamplified chaos. "Stop it! Stop it right now!" she was shrieking, wading ankle-deep in the muck, her pristine blazer ruined, her hair plastered to her face, looking less like a queen and more like the captain of a sinking ship. Jessica Vale was live on air, narrating the scene with brutal precision. "What you are seeing is the enforcement of senior water rights, a demonstration that in Colorado, the Constitution supersedes the HOA. At 3:45 p.m., I walked down the hill to the observation point, flanked by Martha and Mike. Cynthia saw me and charged up the slope, slipping in the mud, Julian trailing behind her waving soggy legal papers. "You are a terrorist," she screamed, trembling with cold and rage. "I will have you buried under the jail." "I am a responsible dam operator," I replied, my voice calm, projecting to the gathered crowd of neighbors who were watching with a mixture of shock and vindication. "This is required maintenance. You built a party in a floodplain, Cynthia. We have a restraining order," Julian yelled, thrusting a piece of paper at me. "That," Martha interjected, stepping forward with the grace of a shark in calm water, "is a fraudulent document drafted by a lawyer who knows damn well that water rights are property rights. You can't restrain gravity, Julian." The investors, watching this spectacle, didn't need to hear anymore. They were already retreating to their cars, squelching through the mud, making calls to cancel deals, realizing that Oakhaven Heights wasn't a gold mine. It was a legal war zone. "You've ruined everything," Cynthia whispered, the fight draining out of her as the water swirled around her knees. "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You did. When you poisoned my garden. When you came for my home. I just turned the valve." The aftermath was swift and total. The investors pulled out, killing the development deal instantly. Julian was disbarred within 6 months after Martha filed ethics complaints regarding the fake court orders. Cynthia's son, Braden, was charged with vandalism for the bleach incident, which the cameras had caught in high definition. And Cynthia? Her house was foreclosed on. She declared bankruptcy and vanished from the neighborhood, a cautionary tale whispered about at potlucks. The HOA board was dissolved and restructured, with Big Mike taking over as president, stripping away the draconian bylaws. We turned the dam maintenance into an annual community event, a festival where we celebrate the water, not fear it. Today, my garden is thriving. The vegetables I grow still go to the food bank, and every time I water the tomatoes, I think of Elena, and I think about the power of standing your ground. Water always finds its level. It flows around obstacles, it wears down stone, and eventually, it washes away the filth. Justice, it turns out, works exactly the same way. But here's the question that keeps me up some nights, looking at the stars over the mountains. Did I go too far? Was ruining a woman's life, even a cruel one, a fair trade for protecting my home? Or was it just vengeance dressed up in a safety vest? Tell me what you think in the comments. Was this justice served cold, or did I become the monster I was fighting? I'm Elias Vance, and this is what happens when the HOA forgets who really owns the water. Smash that like button if you believe in property rights, and don't forget to subscribe. You won't believe the story I have for you next week.